Great to share with you, church and friends again. I'm actually going to share a bit of a difficult thought today. Patience is not optional for the Christian. It's absolutely necessary. Well, according to James chapter 1, 2 to 4, God uses our trials to produce patience. If we remain patient through our hardships and difficulties, they will yield spiritual maturity. If you've got your Bibles, turn to James chapter 1 from around verse 3. He says, "Because you know that the testing of your faith, that is our various trials, develops patience." And he goes on to say, according to verse 4, patience must finish its work so that you may be mature, complete, and lacking in nothing. Our overall theme is going to be, let patience do its work. For patience to do its work in our lives, we must first of all realize God is not in a hurry as far as his gracious oversight over us is concerned. We're going to see that our destiny or God's plan and patience are linked very closely together. Okay, could you define patience if you were asked? Well, let's start with a basic definition of patience. To be patient is to endure discomfort without complaint. Hence, as I said at the beginning, not an easy teaching. A more detailed definition could be the ability to bear things and to turn them into greatness and glory. Patience also involves such things as self-control and humility and generosity. All of themselves are virtues. So one might say that patience is a virtue because it exercises several other virtues. I'd like to look at two aspects of patience: the human-directed side and the God-directed. Sometimes patience is human-directed, and I want to look at that next time. But let's have a look at a few examples. Patience is necessary when waiting your turn in a line. And many of us experience this, having to line up behind people during this coronavirus season. Patience also needs to work when you're stuck in the peak hour of traffic. Maybe waiting for a teenager to mature. Dealing with a co-worker that's pestering you. Or simply enduring discomfort because of other people. Patience is definitely required when interacting with others. But I think even there's a more challenging aspect of patience. And that is the patience that is God-directed. In every Christian life, there comes a time when one must wait upon God. Sometimes we have to wait for our needs to be met. Other times we must wait for the satisfaction of a significant desire we have, or for God to fulfill his purpose, or to comfort us through trials, or to give us some assurance of forgiveness for some sin. In such cases, we must be patient with God. Why is patience toward God so difficult? Good question. Well, the explanation boils down again to our tendency to see things only from our point of view. For one thing, patience with God does involve faith. And to exercise faith is to surrender the final control of one's life. To lack faith is to give in to one's desire for control. Actually, we're going to see that impatience is also a form of pride. So our patience with God will only be as strong as our ability to overcome this desire or need to be in control and surrender every aspect of our lives. Finally, and perhaps most difficult of all, there's no guarantee that God will indeed act to satisfy our desires. Most situations that demand patience aren't in regard to specific promises of God. Although he has told us he will meet all our needs, he hasn't guaranteed that all our desires, even our significant ones, will be satisfied. Well, let's go back to the life of Joseph. We're likely to really have a lot of pity on this young fellow as we see him enter periods of humiliation by being sold as a slave and then cast into irons. We see if human pity, if we just had a bit of pity for this guy, could have rescued him from the sad part of his life. But if that happened, the glorious part that followed would have been lost. We must learn to be patient with God, for all our times are in God's hands. We forget too often when life brings things that are hard to endure, when our plans are broken. Sometimes we fret and even try to rescue others from their suffering. But if we do that, it's a definite no-no. Let God work out his plans for all of us. Someday we will see that God knew best. We all need to understand, in other words, the work of patience in maturing us. Every link in the chain of life is needed, and God's gracious oversight over our lives works according to his clock and not ours. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 says, "He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end." Most of the time, this will mean we have to wait patiently for God. God works slowly and is never in a hurry because he doesn't need to be. Joseph's story should give us hope, especially if our journey required patience and waiting amid discouraging circumstances. The heart of God is beating and the hand of God is working in each of life's experiences. Perhaps the hour of a full revelation has not yet come on the dial of the clock of God. So keep trusting and be patient. God's clock is never a second slow. Though it took years and years for God's purposes to be clear, in the end, Joseph, who patiently endured his suffering, saw the hand of God behind everything that happened to him. There's a really good thought about Joseph, or God's timing, and why Joseph needed to be patient with God. The fulfillment of God's destiny and plan for Joseph hinged so much on his uncanny ability to be patient with God's timing. Just listen to the following thoughts. At just the right time, his brothers threw him into the pit. At just the right moment, the Midianites came along. At just the right moment, he was sold to Potiphar. At just the right moment, Potiphar's wife falsely accused him. At just the right moment, he met the baker and the cupbearer. At just the right moment, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. At just the right moment, Pharaoh called for him. At just the right moment, he was promoted to prime minister. At just the right moment, Jacob sent his sons to Egypt. At just the right moment, the brothers met Joseph. At just the right moment, Jacob's family moved to Egypt. At just the right moment, Pharaoh's offered them the land of Goshen. At just the right moment, they settled there and prospered. If we look with the eyes of faith, we can see God's fingerprints everywhere. Everything in Joseph's life had to happen in a particular way. The chain of circumstances led Joseph from being in a pit to the palace at just the right time. Learn to be patient with God. When he has a great work and a destiny in mind for you and me and others, God is never in a hurry. Keep walking by faith, be obedient, and let patience do its work in you and others. For when patience has its perfect work, the result is healing and a bright future. Catch up with you next time.